To the PID webinar. This is another occasion for us to try and spend our COVID days learning things, trying to understand what's happening in the world. So we are returning today after a long time, after about 2 months, to the subject of COVID, to try and understand how the world might shape up after COVID, or how to get out of COVID. So whichever way you look at it, we are trying to discuss the issue of COVID and possible recovery scenarios. We got 3 people on our panel. We got Khalid Malik, a former UN official, a well-known Pakistani economist who has served in the UNDP in many capacities. Most important, he was a res rep in China. But then another important success that he authored the famous the Human Development Report by Dr. Navid Blackburn. So Khalid Malik ran that for 2 or 3 years. After Khalid Malik, we'll have Dr. Akmal Hossain. I don't think anybody needs to know who Dr. Akmal Hossain is. He is one of Pakistan's leading economists. He has been on the scene in larger than life as an academic. He has published widely, spoke widely, and is a very well-known and revered economist. Following that, we will have PID's Muhammad Nasir, who will present what PID has done on the COVID recovery scenario, and we've made some concrete predictions and things. Unfortunately, we've got a big panel, but we have, how should I say, shorter time. So I would request my speakers to take no more than 10 to 15 minutes to get on, to introduce their idea, thoughts, just say what they want to, and then we'll take questions from you people. So with that, without further ado, I will introduce COVID recovery. Let us begin. Khalid, with you. Khalid, you have the floor.
Anyhow, good morning from the US and good evening to you guys. Assalamu alaikum. Really, Nadeem, thank you so much and for this great initiative you've been supporting in getting a conversation going about development and economics in Pakistan, which is so sorely needed. Let me highlight a few things. Recently, and I sent that joint note I did with Professor Fitosi, a very eminent French economist, on how do you look at COVID recovery as if people matter. And that's not easy to do. The funny thing is, it's very easy to subsidize the rich, but very difficult to try to support the poor. And this is true not just in Pakistan, but also across the board in many countries. I think what is clear is COVID is here to stay. It's not going away in a hurry. We do not know the projections, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years. What it is clear is that you cannot recover without throwing away the rule book. And one part of the rule book, which is particularly pertinent to Pakistan, is debt. And I think we have to just get rid of this idea there's a certain expected level of debt, there's a certain desirable level of debt. So if you look at globally, what has happened is advanced countries have now committed 10 to 20% of their GDP to COVID recovery, economic health issues, about $10 trillion. But when you look at developing countries, they have not been able to manage anything more than 1 to 2% of GDP for COVID recovery. So I like to submit that we have to think much more boldly for Pakistan. We have to think of at least 5% of GDP. And this is something I've also been talking to people like Amartya Sen and Arvind Subramaniam, that we have to, developing countries have to think of at minimum 5% of GDP to be part of the COVID recovery. And I know in Pakistan, of course, the IMF strictures and Nadeem knows that very well, but I think there's a way to deal with that as well. So that's the first point. And then if that basic premise is accepted that we have to go big in order to get out of this hole, what do we do with that 5% GDP? And fundamentally, we have to think of what I call transformative actions. I've long taken the view that development is fundamentally about transformation. And transformation happens when you empower people, health, education, access to markets, so they can do more with their lives, what they call capabilities. And this is something human development thinking is very well grounded and has been a long long experience of global efforts to promote human development. So the first big thing which we can do is do the unthinkable. Introduce universal healthcare in Pakistan. We may not be able to do it all immediately. And, other countries have demonstrated that you can do universal healthcare at low levels of income. Second, in one of the global reports I did, we showed that when North Europe, particularly Scandinavian countries, introduced universal education, their per capita levels were lower than what Pakistan and India are now. So there's no argument that we are too poor to afford to do this thing. I would like to turn the thinking around and say, if we are poor, we have to do that in order to get out of poverty. So the second point which one could think about is that health infrastructure. You cannot overcome the reality of Pakistan that we have a limited health infrastructure and most of the money is in hospitals. I was some years ago when we launched the global report in Mexico with the president of Mexico, I met with the Minister of Economy, who was formerly the Minister of Health. He said, look, it took him 5 years to finally realize that health is too important to leave to doctors, like war. You should not leave it to generals. So you have to think of transformative actions. We can think of other transformative actions. We have to unbundle the supply conditions of, hello, have I lost someone?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. So we have to unbundle the supply condition of textiles or small engineering goods sector to find ways to unleash the supply response. Because you have a funny situation, you devalued the currency, but other sectors have not come up. So you have to look at both the demand side and the supply side. All this is to say that even die-hard, I shouldn't talk about this, but even die-hard monetary specialists, especially those educated in Chicago and otherwise, now are beginning to understand that money matters and it matters how monetary policy is handled. But if we can take actions which will grow the economy, then we can put Pakistan on a very different trajectory by focusing on small farmers, by focusing on things, 4 or 5 actions which will transform the conditions of future growth and future development. So in some ways, crisis is too important to miss out in terms of pushing policies, because only in crisis do policies shift. And this is a very large crisis in front of us. And if we take advantage of this, we can then lay in some basis for a different kind of economy in Pakistan. I think for too long, and everyone knows this, Pakistan has been going up and down with a very narrow band. I think over the next few years, we should be aiming at 8 to 10% growth rates in Pakistan, but growth rates which actually benefit a large number of people, not a small group of people. Because that has implication of macroeconomics, and that has the implication of how an economy should look. I'll stop at this point because I really want to hear what others have to say. Thank you. But this joint article I did with Professor Firdausi, Nadeem has a copy of it, and we'll be happy to circulate that to others.
We will be circulating it, absolutely. In fact, Nabil, if you have it, please just put it on in the chat. Otherwise, I'll send it. Akmal, thank you very much. After that wonderful introduction, Akmal, why don't you start?
Thank you, Nadeem. Khalid and I have been talking over WhatsApp these last few days about the numbers and some of the initiatives that can be taken. Let me start with a simple but unconventional proposition. And that is that in the very act of pulling out of the COVID crisis, we can and we should restructure the economy in such a fashion that it generates high rates of growth on the basis of the talent come out of COVID-19, not only to build an economy that is resilient to pandemics, but we need to restructure the economy in such a way that it works for the people. We must make it an economy for the people and by the people, rather than an economy for and by the elite. That's my first proposition. Now, how do we go about doing this? This 5% of GDP that Khalid has talked about comes to around 2,000 billion rupees a year. And this money should be spent not just on building a health infrastructure. By the way, in building the health infrastructure, we're really talking about going down to the grassroots level, to the basic health units, upgrading basic health units, tehsil level hospitals, building a large cadre of volunteers of the kind that Prime Minister Imran Khan had initiated, who can do tracing and identification in future pandemics. And so if you do that, if you build that kind of infrastructure, apart from constructing hospitals and so on, what you will do is you'll generate a large amount of employment in the process of providing this health infrastructure. The second thing is that I think it's about time, and I've been arguing this for the last 5 years with a lot of evidence, that the government needs to announce the universal provision, not just of healthcare, but of education and also social protection. We can start with healthcare, but we also need social protection right away. This money, this 2,000 billion rupees a year that we're talking about, part of it should be spent on providing security, social security and protection and unemployment benefits to the bottom 45% of the people who I think are now below the poverty line. 45% of the population that is poor has to be provided support and opportunities for developing their talents and opportunities for employment. That's my second point, that we need to announce the universal provision of healthcare, education, and social protection. Social protection includes not just unemployment benefits, it also includes pensions, by the way, state pensions. And I think we need to do this on an urgent basis, because how can you have growth and how can you sustain an economy in which the majority of the people are deprived of the minimum conditions of civilized human existence? And I think if the Prime Minister was to announce this, health, education, and social protection, he'll go a long way in restructuring the economy that works for the people. My third suggestion, the third initiative that can be undertaken with this money that we have, is to design agriculture growth strategy that shifts away from the traditional elite farmer strategy that we have been following for the last 70 years towards a small farmer strategy. Now, small farmers, less than 25-acre farmers, small and medium farmers, constitute something like 97% of the total number of farmers in the country, and they operate over 60% of the total farm area. So there's a huge part of the agriculture economy. And this is precisely that sector, which that class of people who have the greatest potential for increasing yields. And we need to initiate policies through which we can provide high quality inputs, credit, technologies through which they can not only improve their water use efficiency and go into tunnel farming for high value added crops, but can also diversify the agriculture economy towards dairy farming and livestock production for exports. Now, if you do that, if you provide these technologies and these skills and these facilities to the small farm sector, you will have high rates of agriculture growth that are based on the enterprise of the people rather than just the elite. And at the same time, you will get a more export-oriented agriculture growth. So I think the small farm sector is a very important sector which has been ignored, and we need to move into it. My fourth suggested initiative is this money that you have. This fourth initiative would be to support. Sorry, what are you saying? I can't hear you, Nadeem. Can everybody hear me, by the way?
Yes, sir, we
We
can
can hear you fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying
There
anything.
there is an institutional arrangement that can be made to provide the kind of support I was mentioning to the small farm sector. And that is the establishment of small farmer development corporations in every province and every district. And what the small farmer development corporations would do is that the government should provide loans for them to put as equity into these corporations. So they would be owned by the poor, but they would be run by professionals. And these small farmer development corporations can provide to the small farm sector the kinds of technologies I was telling you about: drip farming, tunnel farming, better land use, a credit for better quality seeds, enable them to do marketing, but get better prices in the marketing process, and at the same time diversifying towards milk and milk production, milk products, as well as livestock. Now, if you look at Pakistan geographically, we are at the hub of a milk deficit crescent. There's milk deficit on our western side, on our northern side, and on our either eastern side beyond India towards Southeast Asia. So if these farmers could increase their yield per acre, yield per animal, and increase the number of animals they have, and if you could help them to process this milk and export the milk and milk products, you will have very high rates of growth that are export oriented. And it is precisely the small farmers who can contribute to this higher growth and higher rates of exports. My final suggestion is the support of small scale manufacturing enterprises. Here again, they're employment intensive. They can produce high value added goods if you provide the right kind of support services, and they are export oriented. So we need to build common facility centers, support centers for the small industry sector, just as we're doing in the case of the small farm sector in these suggestions. So if you do this, if you take these initiatives with the money that is being proposed here, then what you will do is that you will actually be restructuring the economy in such a way that you generate high rates of growth on the basis of the talent and enterprise of the people. This growth will be driven by the people rather than by the elite only. And it will be an export oriented growth. And at the same time, it will build an economy that is resilient. I mean, if you provide a universal healthcare, education, and social protection, we're talking about a pandemic resistant economy here. So I think I'll end here.
Kamal sir, thank you very much. Very nice discourse. Number of suggestions, number of important ideas. Nasir Saab, are you there? Muhammad Nasir.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Nasir Saab, you have
Yes,
10
sir.
minutes. Okay, quickly, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I think before we talk about the projection that we made through our PIDE study, we should understand and first talk about what are the vulnerabilities that were exposed by the COVID-19. So I do agree with the points raised by the co-panelist. I think the COVID-19 exposed vulnerabilities in our health sector. So when we faced this pandemic, we realized that, okay, we have less number of ventilators, less number of ICU beds. We face vulnerabilities in education sector. Now that we go online, there is an uproar from students or boycotting the classes because people in far-flung areas don't have access to technology, whether it's internet or the computer or laptop. There are job vulnerabilities. We see that the most vulnerable were the ones who were laid off. we see that our occupations are not set up in such a way that we can work remotely. So only 18 to 19% of our occupation can work remotely. We saw that our local government system is not good enough to identify the most vulnerables where we can deliver them the money even through SAS programs. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that have been exposed to this pandemic. And I agree with Akmal Saab that maybe this pandemic actually brought an opportunity to restructure our economy and the administrative system as well. Now, giving a little background of what we are projecting for the next year is that because the situation is very fluid, and so we have to make certain assumptions. So we actually made 3 scenarios. So in the first scenario, we assume that the pandemic would recede away in the next quarter, that is still September. And we are also assuming that government somehow would be able to neutralize the locust attack. Now, in that, so that's the first scenario. In the second scenario, we assume that there could be another wave of the COVID-19, and in that case, it may extend till December. And in the third, which is the worst case scenario, it may extend to the third quarter of the fiscal year 20. So that is March 2021. And that is the most pessimistic scenario. Now, using these scenarios, we come up with the growth projection. So in the first case, where we assume that the situation would be better till September, we assume for the next fiscal year, the growth would be around 1.33%. Now, the government, with the same assumption, say that they are going to get a growth of 2%, which we think is highly unlikely with the current situation. In the second scenario, if the situation extends till December and we also face the locust attack, the next year, in the next fiscal year, we would have a growth of actually 0%. And if it extends to March, then we would have a growth of minus 1.5%. So the economy would further contract. Now, what happens is that keeping in mind the worst case scenario, our tax revenue that we project is that it would be around 11.7%, and our deficit would be 10.4%. And as Khalid Saab mentioned, the developing countries are actually reporting just around 1 to 2%. In our pessimistic case, our projection is that we would be locating it around 1%, actually less than 1%, 0.9%. So our inflation would be between 6 to 9% because of the decrease in the aggregate demand. Whereas there could be pressure on the exchange rate and could range between 166 to 185. In the next quarter, we expect that there could be an increase in the remittances, but if the slowdown, the global slowdown continue, we can see a decrease of 4 to 5% in remittances, and that's going to have an adverse effect on our trade balance. Now, with this worst case scenario, if we have a contraction in growth in the next year, our poverty would reach to 34%. That would mean 75 million people in poverty. And our unemployment, including the layoff, would reach around 17 million. And when it comes to the youth unemployment, it could range between 7 to 9 million, whereas the women unemployment could be around 5.3 million. Now, this is important. These numbers are important because, as the co-panelists mentioned, that we need to have a higher percentage of allocated for the COVID expenses. We need to keep in mind the situation. Our poverty will increase, the unemployment will increase, the youth unemployment would increase, and that could actually result in social unrest. So that is something we need to keep in mind. Now, more importantly, because of the closure of the schools and education institutions, so we already have more than 20 million out of school children, but with the closure, more than 55 million children have been affected. Now, from the Human Capital Index, we know that the average schooling in Pakistan is around 8 years, but if you adjust for the quality, it is around 4.7 years. And if you bring in the COVID impact, if the school is closed, there could be a reduction in this by 18%. So the situation is very worse in terms of the human capital situation. And because we're economists, we need to actually monetize this. So what is the loss because of this closure? If it extends till March and we see the reduction, so we see that the lifetime earning loss per individual would be around $3,300 US, And if we aggregate it for the aggregate income foregone because of this, it could range from 78 to 182 billion dollars. So this closure, reduction in education, would actually have a future loss in income to the economy. Now, this situation is, very worst, and I agree with the points that the co-panelists raised, but we also need to see that where would that money come from. So we also have some suggestions. It's not just the stimulus from the government expenses, but also we need to look at the tax structure. So we have a lot of taxes, especially withholding taxes, and some of the withholding taxes actually just increase the compliance cost. So for example, there are around 45 withholding taxes that contribute less than 1% of the revenue in the income tax. So why don't we remove that? Because removal of that would reduce the compliance cost and the income that is reduced. If the businesses reinvest them through the multiplier effect, there would be further growth in the economy, and we can actually earn more. And there could be also an increase in the revenue. Similarly, we can also have, the employment guarantee scheme. So for a simple calculation, if let's say we want to give an employment for let's say 2 million people, and if we want to give them a minimum wage of 17,500, that for 4 months or 120 days, that would cost around 140 billion rupees. So, and now the thing is how we would employ them. If there are educated individuals, we can actually engage them in educating other people. And if there are uneducated youth, we can engage them in infrastructure projects. So in some way we are employing them, but we are doing something that can actually pay off in the future. Thank you.
Nasir Saab, thank you very much. Good.
Nadeem,
Ji,
could I just make a quick comment on the numbers?
go ahead.
Actually, my own thinking is that the final impact of COVID on Pakistan is going to be much larger than what the numbers were just presented. IMF is estimating a 5% drop in GDP globally. The World Bank has talked about 100 million new poor. The FAO has talked about 130 million people newly hungry people. So my sense, these things take lags. So my suspicion is that actually this year you're talking about a recession, maybe a severe recession. So 1-2%, I don't think that's going to work out. But I just want to give you a certain context in looking at the numbers.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
If I could also respond, Nadeem, very quickly in a minute. I think I was going to mention this is an excellent idea, the employment guarantee scheme, where you guarantee, let's say, 220 days of the year employment to those who are unemployed, and you focus on the rural sector particularly, and ask people to help build rural infrastructure. There are a large number of kacha water channels that are broken down. The canal lining is in terrible shape. We're losing a huge amount of water during transportation. Our irrigation efficiency is down to about 37%. And so I think if you employ people to use labor-intensive methods of reconstructing your irrigation infrastructure, that'll be a big achievement, and you'll also be generating a large number of jobs. The other thing, I think the point was by the way, it's an excellent presentation, Mohammad Nisar Sahib. I really enjoyed your thoughts. Your question of where will the money come from, this 2,000 billion, there's no way that the government can spend 5% of the GDP on restructuring and the economy and pulling it out of COVID unless we get rid of the debt stock. At the moment, debt servicing alone constitutes about 45% of total government revenue. So unless we get some kind of debt moratorium for the next 2 to 3 years, this kind of money of 2,000 billion a year can't be spent. And as Nadeem has earlier on shown very clearly through his own research, and I support that idea, which is that in the next 2 to 3 years, Pakistan can take measures to get rid of its debt stock altogether, rather than just get debt relief. And that we can do by leasing out to large property developers internationally, leasing out prime urban land which the government owns and which is not really generating much income. In every city, you have hundreds of acres, probably thousands of acres of prime urban land, which is just lying waste. You've got old-fashioned offices sitting there or just blank land. You know, if you have a private company and the company builds up such a huge debt that it gets paralyzed, then the logical thing for the company is to restructure its capital assets, either sell them or restructure them so that they start generating income. That's what Pakistan should do with their own assets. At the same time, I think it's important to stop this hemorrhaging of the exchequer as a result of these white elephants that we've got, these state-owned enterprises like PIA, you know, which is through its incompetence not only killing people, but is actually depriving the taxpayers' money of billions of dollars, billions of rupees every year because of its losses. So I think entities, state-owned entities like the PIA and others need to be sold as quickly as possible. And the government needs to make a law under which all revenues earned from the sale of state assets will go into the retirement of debt. Once you got rid of the debt stock, it's not such a huge debt stock. You know, I mean, a large American company has this kind of asset, 120 billion. It's not such a huge amount. And we've got huge resources. And the point is that if you retire your debt, then you win the fiscal space to do the kinds of things that all three of us have been talking about.
Okay, thank you, folks. I think we'll go to the floor. But before I do that, let me ask both you, Khalid and Akmal. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I like what you're saying. But where is this $5 billion going to come from? I mean, I can't resist my IMF background. I have to think of the financing. And I know the world is not a kind place. Nobody's going to give us a debt moratorium. Debt is there and we have to pay it. The second issue that I don't understand is we build so much. We built everything under the sun. We've got Punjab Education Foundation. We've got even a Punjab Population Innovation Fund. We even got a Punjab Skills Development Fund. We've got a NAFDEC, which is skills development. We've got a TEVTA, which is skills development. We've got agencies coming out of our ears. We've got the Board of Investment. We've got Punjab Board of Investment. Every province has one. We've got a PPIB. Every province has one. We've got God knows how many agencies. Are you telling me that just building another agency or telling the government to do it will do it? Does the government have the capacity? Does the government have the ability to do any of the things that you're suggesting? So, A, the financing, 2, the capacity.
Actually, you know, the problem is not that the government doesn't have capacity.
Let Khalid go first and you can come in.
I think I'm so glad that we have a former IMF person asking the right questions. Where is the money coming from? I think the whole argument is that in a crisis of this magnitude, what is COVID is experiencing globally, these rules do not matter.
Okay.
If the US can go up to a huge debt levels, as if debt doesn't matter, it's absolutely correct. Debt doesn't matter when you are declining as an economy. You have to increase the aggregate demand. And in our case, in Pakistan, you also have to affect the supply conditions, because increasing aggregate demand and the supply doesn't move also will have inflationary impact. So I'm not too worried about deficit financing. Now, because of the very particular nature of Pakistan and the IMF program, you know, if you look at even the research department of the IMF, there's some very good people who are arguing exactly the point I'm trying to make, that this is the time to not worry about debt. This is a time to recover from a sharp depression. And I'll give you a very simple example. If your economy is growing, you can manage almost any level of debt. If your economy is going down, you cannot manage any level of debt. It's as simple as that. you have to grow in order to allow returns to come in so that you can grow more. And the reverse is true. And this is the basic tenet of what Keynes said a long time ago. So I'm not too worried, and that's the point we made in this article with Jean-Paul Fitoussi. Fitoussi was, the leader with the Stern and Stiglitz of the Sarkozy Commission, and he chairs the high-level panel at the OECD with the Stiglitz as well. So we are trying to argue, not just for Pakistan, but everywhere, that do not worry about debt at this point. These are, there were all these academic articles which turned out to be wrong about what should be the desired level of debt. 80%, 90%, Reinhardt and others. Didn't make any sense once you look at the papers more carefully. So I'm not too worried about it, and Pakistan should definitely not worry about it either.
Yeah, my response to Nadeem's very fertile questions is twofold. One is that, when you worry about debt, you're basically not looking at absolute numbers, you're looking at the debt GDP ratios. Now the numerator is high and gets worrisome if the denominator is low. If you accelerate growth and increase your total GDP, increase the size of the numerator, then the debt GDP ratio will decline even at the present high levels. So I think the challenge really is to generate high rates of growth that is based on the middle classes and the poor, rather than on the basis of the elite, so that you not only generate growth, but you generate growth on the basis of equality rather than inequality. And I think with that kind of program, you'll get a lot of sympathy internationally. I think while we're sort of designing these strategies, the government needs to approach international agencies to ask for some kind of debt write-off. In order, now there's a very clear trade-off. We either spend the kind of money we're talking about to save lives, or we service our debts. There's a clear trade-off between money and human life. I think if you approach the international organizations, you might be able to get some kind of relief from them. But you need to follow that up with practical measures, which Dr. Nadeemul Haq himself has pioneered, in fact, earlier on in the earlier years. And which are fantastic suggestions, that you take 4 or 5 major cities, look at the government-owned land in prime localities, which is lying useless. And what you do is you just lease that land out to property developers. That land will develop. At the same time, you'll get money from the leasing out, and you help to retire your debt. What's to prevent you from doing that? And secondly, what is preventing you from selling state-owned enterprises which are taking the blood out of your treasury, hemorrhaging the treasury, and also taking the blood out of people by killing them through incompetent pilots and incompetent civil aviation authorities.
And just to add quickly, next week, Pakistan is becoming the president of ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council of the UN. And in this, Munir Akram, the ambassador, is taking up the issue of debt forgiveness formally, and to get an initiative to encourage other governments and institutions, including the IMF, to do the same. So there's a huge momentum going on internationally to do exactly that, to try to get debt under some control and to even talk about debt forgiveness for some countries.
Great, wonderful. Let's go to the floor. Nizam Saab, what would you like to say? Nizamuddin, former Chancellor.
It's nice to see Dr.
Nizam,
Malik.
Assalamu alaikum. Kya haal hai? Theek thaak?
Fine, fine. I was completely mesmerized by the presentation of Akmal Saab. Complete debt program for Pakistan's development. And then Nadeemul Haq Saab said, we have all those things available. The PEF, the NEFTAC, the TEFTAS. Problem is, my argument is that money should not be a problem. The implementation of money, the use of money that we are wasting and not using, that's the problem. Education sector had money, but didn't spend it. Our education sector, Punjab, only spends 60% of the allocated money that they get every year. 40% they don't even spend it year after year after year. Money is not the issue. Issue is how to implement what you plan. For example, now I'm working in the private sector. What I'm seeing in the private sector that they're getting rid of the visiting scholars, visiting faculty, because they don't need visiting faculty. But they're through the technology, they're using their own regular faculty now. That might become a trend. Same thing about public sector universities also use visiting faculty, almost 20%. They may also get rid of them. What we need to do, build the school system and the education, agriculture sector, as Akmal Saab said. Our agriculture sector and health sector, my proposal would be, based on my experience, go to the Iran model, have every village a health house. Not health center we don't need, we need a health house. We need an education house in every village. We cannot wait for primary school building. Building will take 5 years to build. But then this number of school will be multiplied. So my suggestion would be immediately go for each village to build a health house, education house. These two factors you can right away take care. And health house can also talk about population repertoire and service program as well, which we badly needed. We have 23% unmet demand in Pakistan. If you build a health house, provide them services and supplies, coupled with the visiting mobile units, you can really do this. Get rid of all these workers and officers that you have developed in the Ministry of Population Welfare or the Ministry of Education. Just go to the village. Have every village a school, every village a health house. That will be the problem. Plus the agriculture side, Akmal Saab has talked about it. I'll talk to Akmal Saab separately because I was really very much influenced by his total package that he produced, for which, believe me, you don't need money. You have money in Pakistan, just use it properly. That's my argument.
Wonderful. Great. G, anybody else? Akmal, Khalid, do you want to say anything on it?
Well, I think Nizam has put a very important point there that, if you look at healthcare, the biggest impact on health outcomes is not at the tertiary level, meaning hospitals, but at the primary level. And if you can strengthen the primary level, that we call it health units or houses, the Barefoot Doctor Program of China, which has very little investment in, had a huge impact on mortality rates. And if you combine that with water supply and sanitation, that's the way to actually improve the health care of a lot of people, as opposed to looking after a small number, which will never be able to meet that demand. So I think it's a question of reorienting all of this, but you still need money to do many of these things. Huh?
Akmal? Akmal, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
And Nizam Sahib has raised some fascinating follow-up points on how things can be done. And I agree with him that we still have a lot of money. It's a question of using it. But, the absolute amount of money required for the kinds of initiatives we're taking cannot be spent unless we get rid of this huge burden of debt servicing, which is consuming 55% of total tax revenue. Immediately get either get a total debt write-off, a debt forgiveness, if you want to call it that, or do the kind of thing that Nadeem has been arguing over the last many years, which is to sell those assets or lease out those assets which are not currently utilizing in the major urban centers through leasing out to property developers. And please, for God's sake, sell state-owned enterprises which are earning large losses and providing very poor services to the people. If you do that, you will be able to get rid of your total debt stock. Baki, I think there's one very important thing to understand on the agriculture side, which is that the international agencies are now predicting not only this COVID, but they're now predicting a major famine globally because of supply constraint. The supply chain in the agriculture sector has been upset by the COVID-19 crisis. And I think Pakistan needs to secure its grain production by going to the small farmer, and as I said, in making sure that the small farmers get the right quality, the good quality fertilizer, the good quality seed, the pesticides, and they are provided enough water for the crops so that they can produce adequate quantities of wheat and rice. We must secure an iron ration of grain the following year if we are to avoid a famine. You know, this year we were thinking of importing grain. Next year, it may not be possible to import grain because of the global shortage. And grain prices would either become extremely high, which you won't be able to afford, or a grain supply simply may not be available in the international market. So we need to put our act together on the agriculture side very quickly.
Nisar Memon sir? Nisar sir?
Thank you very much. I think it was great to hear all the very educated, researched views and very firm views. And I think the solutions are there. I would only like to add one thing, is that we have a base of IT. Thank God somewhere we did provide this, that today we are, despite the fact that we are all locked down, we are linked up. So I think we need to take this for the education, like somebody mentioned about the mobile dispensaries and education. I think we need to build up very strong information technology, which I think Dr. Akmal can appreciate a lot, that we can have because we can't take the specialists to the rural areas. And I think I agree that our entire focus should be the rural economy, the rural people who hardly have a decent living. They don't even have a human living. We know what kind of water they drink, and we don't have any facilities. So I think education and health could be brought to them, a specialized thing. So this is one thing we need to build up. Now, my question not to the panel, but to Nadeem, who's part of the panel leading it, is that we have been talking about for quite some time. And I think there is a matter of urgency. Whatever your researchers and you and your panelists have been saying, I think this now need to be put up as an alternate economy, because it's good to say that we will tell the government. Yes, we have been telling the government. We have all been telling the government for years and years. Now, question is, how do we really implement it? That is my question. And my suggestion will be that why don't you lead the whole effort and put the entire thing post-COVID economy, and then it's just like you have a product in the agriculture, in the rural, but there is no marketing done. I think you need to market it by way of going around each of the governments, which means all the provincial governments and the federal government, and insist on them. You have a panel, you have the specialists, and you prepare an alternate economy post-COVID immediately. Because I think if you leave it like this discussion, I am afraid then after a few months we'll be sitting and we'll be saying, well, we said it, but nothing happened. I leave it to that. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, if I may just take 30 seconds to thank Nadeem, Dr. Nadeemul Haq, for organizing a series of excellent webinars. And, you know, this is apart from his curiosity, creative curiosity, which he's retained since his school days. His other great attribute is that he is willing to initiate a debate, even though he disagrees with most of the people on the other side. I mean, I disagree with Nadeem very strongly, but, you know, I'm fascinated by how open he is. You know, he's had this whole series of debates. But I think you're right. It's about time that, you know, these debates and the conclusions that have been arrived at should be translated into some kind of serious policy paper. White can probably do it. You know, you have connections. You have connections with the government, and you know, this is a kind of alternative perspective on how to get out of the COVID crisis and rebuild a different kind of economy, an economy for the people. And I think Nadeem can lead that effort as well, you know, the writing part of it.
Can I add to this praise of Nadeem, Dr. Nadeemul Haq? You know, if you look at the Chinese agriculture, there's a book I've written on China. If you look at Chinese agriculture, most of agriculture is actually small farmer-led. There are no large farms in China, but the per hectare productivity is very high. China, you believe it or not, you can go to Delhi and find in the flower markets flowers sent from Kunming in China. They've taken over these markets globally. So it is possible to unleash the capabilities of small farmers, but you have to do it right. And part of the right stuff is to give them the support they need to make it happen. The farmers in China don't even own their farm. They only have long leases on it. So, you know, there are a lot of issues there. Unless we change our mindset, and as Akmal said, try to focus on people themselves, to empower them to do a better job, this thing will not work. And that's fundamentally about development. We have to break out of this very cyclical approach in Pakistan of improving a little bit and going down a little bit, improving a little bit, going down a little. So it's time to unleash the creative energies of people. Huh?
But look, I'd like to still bring you back to something. Parallel with us, there is a webinar going on with Darren Acemoglu. And Darren Acemoglu talks about extractive institutions. I'm sure both of you will agree that Pakistan has extractive institutions. Now the question is, an extractive institution, can we overlay a welfare paradigm that you guys are proclaiming, that you guys are suggesting? Or do we have to first change the extractive institutions? And there, the question that I would have for Darren Acemoglu if I was there was, how do you change the extractive institutions? So I would like you to comment on this. Is this agenda even possible in a country like Pakistan?
Well, let me give you a slightly alternate view to Acemoglu. In the 2014 Global Human Development Report, we did a lot of econometric work to look at, you know, the idea was that if you open up an economy, trade will just take off the economy. Huh? And when we look at all the data, you found that opening to the world markets is good only if you have one condition, which is if your people are educated and have healthcare. If you don't have that, you can have a worse off situation. So I think rather than have this big debate of extractive industries or extractive institutions, it is true that in Pakistan, you can argue that if the elite is not interested in development, it's going to be very difficult to have those policies to lift people out of poverty. And we can have a long debate about these things, but unfortunately in a situation which Pakistan is in now, we have to deal with the present situation. The present situation is that we hope PIDE can play its amazingly important role in convincing policymakers to shift ground, especially when there's a huge crisis like this. And if you don't shift ground, you're going to be much worse off. And I think you're talking about an economy which is cratering dramatically, but we do not know the details and the numbers as yet fully. So we have to find a way to, in a suboptimal way, get out of this situation. We understand, of course, that our politicians basically came from the rural class, basically became industrialists. So the incentive for them to develop, to improve the conditions of poor people is not high. We understand that. But we have to find some way out of this conundrum. And that we are hoping that through these conversations and through Nadeem's leadership of PIDE, we can find some ways of opening up that space for proper decision-making and proper policy-making. And it doesn't matter if policies are all not right.
How do we deal with the capacity issue? I'm still concerned that governments who don't have the ability to implement even a simple thing like the energy policy, how can that government possibly implement all that you...
Yeah, but take again an alternate view. There's argument being made that good institutions do not necessarily precede development. Good institutions tend to come after development. So you cannot argue easily, as many have done, that you need good institutions to develop. Where will they come from? And there's a whole view that if you educate society, if you move forward, the institutions get better. So there's a lot of debate on these matters. So I don't want to get stuck in some ways ultimately theoretical considerations. We have a practical challenge. that you have a
Fair point.
economy
Fair
about
point.
to create in Pakistan.
Nasir
You have to
Iqbal
do
Saab,
something about it.
you want to say something? Nasir Iqbal?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Ji, Nasir Saab.
Yes, sir. The real issue is like,
Didi, we can hear you now.
as Khalid Saab asking about the whether we have to focus on the institutions or the development, what would be the first priority? So there is a paper by Adris Khwaja. He was like a research economist at PIDE, and he basically reviewed this whole debate and the path dependency and try to dig into deep the whole issue of underdevelopment in the South Punjab and interior Sindh, and linked with the institutional backing of this whole exercise. So and he gives like an alternative solution. So like they are like a very rigid to change, but if we educate our society, that would be the first step, and this would give an incentive to these people that these are the institutions where there is a less rent to the politicians, and when there is a less rent, they are like there is a less opposition to reform these institutions. So we have to start from reforming our institution system, education system, and that ultimately lead toward the development. And one comment to the point that basically raised by Dr. Akmal, that we have to privatize and sell all the SOEs, that will give a boost to economic activities. If the underlying assumption is that the government basically is not equipped enough to implement the policies, then we are suggesting another free lunch to these government. So they are earning like a free money by selling these entities. And if they are not like they don't have enough capacity to implement the existing structure, how we can say that after selling these SOEs and the income that they are coming from these resources would be converted into the development activity? Probably that will be diverted into unproductive sectors, and still we will be trapped in the same situation. So this might not be an optimal solution.
Can I quickly comment, Nadeem? Hello?
Yeah, Khalid, you go ahead, and then I'd like to respond to Nadeem as well.
Right,
Okay,
second.
so-
Can we just take two more comments and you guys can do it so that we finish up?
Sure.
Right, Zahra Aftab. Zahra, you going to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so
Yeah, we
I
can
just
hear
wanted to mention that in this age, there can be online systems implemented to improve transparency and to prevent pilferage. So perhaps if I'm not a technician here, but I'm sure there have been similar projects in India, and we could at a local level try to institute such a scheme that as implementation occurs in real time, it is posted on the website and there's better monitoring.
Okay.
That's it.
Mahmood Khalid Saab, do you want to say anything? Mahmood Khalid has his hand up. Now he's gone.
No, sir. Sir, my question is very simple. Dr. Akmal Hussain have talked about the universal access to basic services such as health, education. So I believe this could be the one element which can go into a long-term phase of improvement where everybody has the same kind of a startup point rather than having a differentiated initial point. So I think if that alone can be implemented, can lead towards many good things in future.
Okay, go ahead, Khalid.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry to keep drawing upon Chinese experience, but let me tell you something I was directly involved in. China came to us when I was there at the UN there to help them design a performance system which will put outcomes, education, social development, growth as the performance measurement of civil service, senior servants, governors, vice governors, so on and so forth. You know, when you make the future of these civil servants dependent on real development progress, it changes incentives dramatically. You cannot imagine the pressure created by that. it may be even unfair pressure. So if the minute you introduce a system, a very simple system, which says that this governor or this deputy commissioner will only get promoted if his zilla or tahsil actually improves, you'll see that they'll be the first ones to push development. But this requires a fair amount of political courage to make it happen. It is possible and it has been done. The second thing is, you know, transparency is very important, but you have to minimize rents seeking behavior. And the rent seeking behavior is to put everything on the web so that people don't have to interact with police services or with social services that much, except through an internet-based system which allows them to manage it easily. So there are all kinds of experiences globally which could be harvested for that. But the fundamental issue remains that in the end, there are no perfect policies. You must learn from your mistakes. You must learn to do your own homegrown measures. And I'll give you one, I'll end with this one example. The World Bank and the IMF have been telling us for the last 40 years, do not subsidize agriculture sectors. But there's not a single historical case where agriculture has gone up without subsidies, and that includes developed countries. So somehow this whole question of balanced budgets and subsidies has gone out of whack. And we have to find a way which is very practical. In the end, you have to support systems. You have to support institutions, may not be perfect institutions. You have to support incentives, may not be perfect incentives. But over time, if you make the future of these civil servants depend on their performance and their progress, not performance in terms of their own contribution, but rather the performance of their tahsils and their zillas, you'll find a shift in perspectives, which is well documented in other countries as well.
Akmal Saab,
if I can respond to Nadeem's two very important issues he's raised. I don't quite agree with Khalid that institutional change should follow development. I think institutional change in Pakistan.
By the way, Akmal, this is the only time Akmal has disagreed with me. So just let the record there.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that if you have an institutional structure of the kind in Pakistan, which is extractive in nature, as Asim Oglu and others have said, then a necessary condition for going forward is precisely to change that institutional structure. The point, however, is where do we make the start? Because, you know, we have on our hands probably the gravest human and economic crisis that this country has ever faced. Indeed, the world has ever faced. And so this is an opportunity for transformative initiatives. We need to take initiatives across 4 fronts. We need to take an initiative. We need to change the incentive system for the bureaucracy, restructure the bureaucracy, change the incentive system. I assure you that there is huge talent in the bureaucracy sitting right now. I've been teaching them for the last 4 decades, and I can tell you there's huge talent there. And it's a question of directing that talent, giving them the right incentives, giving them a fair deal, giving them recognition, and the bureaucracy will start behaving differently. The other thing is that, you know, this business about creating institutions that we have done of big mafias in sugar and wheat and even in manufacturing industry, the government, this is a time for the government to restructure those institutions. We have to redesign the economy in such a way that we generate growth that is based on the enterprise and capabilities of human beings. And all the structural changes that are required to move in that pro-poor growth direction, we need to undertake those changes. You won't have a crisis of this magnitude, hopefully, in the near future. This is the time to take desperate steps, because it is a desperate situation.
Okay.
There are 2 ways in which you can deal with it. You know, you can either take minimal steps and wait for things to improve on their own and let things carry on pretty much as they were before COVID, or you can take transformative actions in getting out of the COVID crisis. And these transformative actions are what we pointed to. But I agree with Nadeem and the other institutional economists. I've been arguing this for a long time. Simultaneously with the other structural changes, we need to do something about these extractive institutions.
Can I just, I don't want Nadeem or Akmal to feel that I was arguing for poor institutions. To the contrary, I think institutions matter, but the historical evidence is that they get better as development happens. So you do not start with perfect institutions, and that's the whole point. Not to get obsessed by designing perfect institutions. We will learn and adapt and adjust as we move along.
Sure, of course. Yeah. But we're going to start improving them.
I haven't come to you, Nasir Sahab. Please, ये जो उन्होंने बात की थी पाइड के एस्टिमेट्स की और वर्ल्ड बैंक और ग्लोबल एस्टिमेट्स, जरा उस पर तो कमेंट करते हैं ताकि आपकी भी बात, बाकी जो भी डिस्कशन हुई है, whatever you like, you can talk because then we have to kind of close it.
जी, thank you sir. A few scatter points. उसमें जो पहला खालिद साहब ने you mentioned about the IMF projections. In fact, our projections, the IMF projection for the next year growth is actually 1% for Pakistan. So I understand for the global economy, the projections are worse, but for Pakistan, they're projecting that it will achieve a 1% growth. Whereas the World Bank projection for the next year is minus 0.2%. Our worst case scenario shows that there will be contraction of minus 1.5%. So I think what you are saying is हम उसके करीब हैं, लेकिन there could be worse situation because of course these are projections depending on different assumptions, and because the situation is very, very fluid, we don't know आगे और उसमें क्या-क्या चीजें हो सकती हैं. But for now, compared to the IFI's projections, our projection, the worst case scenario है, it shows that our economy would contract by 1.5%. दूसरी चीज sir, the thing that I wanted to talk about is when we talk about getting this money for the stimulus package, I understand the institutional reforms, वो सारी बातें, but you know, because of the political economy and all this situation, I don't see these to be a short-term measure. This will go to, of course, the parliament and, you know, all this debate and going on. Of course, this is an opportunity and we should do it, but it will take time. But what we need right now and quickly is to kickstart the economy. And for this, we need to do something that is being agreed upon in the parliament as well, or जो जल्दी किया जा सके उसको. So I agree on SOEs जो हैं, of course, these are a burden on the economy, but not just that, but also the tax expenditure, जो exemptions we are giving, the SROs and everything, except for the health and education, and that too should be part of the policy instead of कि जी जब आपकी मर्जी हो, you give the SROs and create distortion in the economy. That shouldn't be there. तीसरी चीज सर, जो releasing the like getting the money for the kickstarting and the stimulus package, I think we can also reduce the interest rate. State Bank has reduced it till 7%, but there is, I think, still scope for reducing it till 4 to 5%. वहाँ से भी हमें कुछ release मिल सकता है. I think using these, and then एक और point से मैं करना चाहूँगा उसमें कि जी, even if you want to start, even if you want to invest, even if you want to start a business, is it that easy in Pakistan? If you look at the amount of regulations, आपको एक पूरी permission economy है. You go and you take permission from this institution and then the other and then the other, and it's not just the number of permissions or NOCs that you get. The amount of time that you spend in taking and getting that permission is huge. So even if you have capital, even if you have intentions, even if you have capability, would this over-regulated economy allow you to function, to come to the formal sector and invest and grow? पहले तो हमें उनको reduce करना चाहिए. I think these are some of the short-term measures that we need right now, and the institutional reforms broad जो है, this could be medium to long-term steps. Thank you, sir.
Very good, folks. Well, I guess we've come to the end of the session. Thank you very much, folks. I think it's been a wonderful session. Thank you, Khalid, Akmal, Nasir, for making yourself available. I think you guys always elevate the debate when you come in. It's a fundamental debate that we should have, the extent of the welfare state and our capacity to get it, how to have growth happen, where the growth comes first, welfare comes first, or institutions comes first. I think these are subjects that we should all debate endlessly. This is the meat of economics, the heart of economics. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And inshallah, we will call you again and again because we need to discuss these issues again and again. PIB is trying to work on these issues, and I would invite all of you to help us work on these issues. As you said, present work to the government. We try and do that every day. But as I said, unfortunately, our government doesn't have ears. Our government doesn't have the thinking capacity. Our government doesn't want to engage with us. Our government doesn't want to engage with the intellectual community or anything. They just occasionally invite you to a task force or a committee and forget about it. So that's what I mean by the ability to do things. I think the capacity issues are enormous. World Bank, ADB, UNDP has spent a lot of money and doing a lot of work in Pakistan. World Bank, ADB, etc., etc. We've set up agency after agency. There are about 10,000 agencies all over the place. As I said, I learned the other day, we got a population innovation fund. I don't know what innovation is in population, but there is innovation happening in population. This was a different funded project. We've got Raftar on taxation. We've got Andaz or Karandaz or whatever. So we've got thousands of institutions. We are not short of agencies. I wish agencies could create welfare and growth, but I'm puzzled. I don't know how to do it. I'm not giving you any answers. I'm giving you questions. I'm giving you my puzzles. Thank you very much, folks. Inshallah, we will join you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadeem, and everybody. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.